Hello, everyone. Welcome to Gaslit Nation. I'm your co host, Andrea Chalupa. As you know, we are going to be doing an extremely important phone banking event with our friends at Sister District. It's going to be this coming Tuesday. You do not want to miss it. It's Tuesday, October 25th. 5 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be calling voters in North Carolina. Why is North Carolina important? Because it's one of the places, one of the states where women across the South, many of them have been impacted by these extreme abortion laws, these anti-healthcare laws, these extreme bans. And so North Carolina, where abortion is currently still legal, has become basically a sanctuary for women to get the health care they need, right? Instead of dying from being forced to carry a pregnancy that's dying inside of them, or just to make whatever choices they want about their body. So North Carolina is a safe state currently for women, for women's healthcare, for people's healthcare. We want to keep it that way. That's why we're going to make calls to North Carolina voters with Sister District Tuesday, October 25 at 5 p.m. Eastern. You can RSVP for that on the Gaslit Nation website, gaslitnationpod.com. Just click on the 2022 survival guide on our homepage. That's gaslitnationpod.com. I will be there making the calls with you. We'll have a quick training. Join us. And to talk us through the all important work of Sister District is Gaby Goldstein, the co-founder, whose mission, the Sister District mission, is to build progressive power in state legislatures. As a senior vice president for strategic initiatives, Gaby leads programs that strengthen the pipeline of diverse progressive candidates, as well as programs that educate the public about the importance of state legislatures and policy, and which support progressive state legislators once elected. Prior to founding Sister District, she was a bioethics lawyer and health policy researcher. She holds a BA from UC Berkeley, a JD from Boston University School of Law, and a PhD in health policy from UC Berkeley. Thank you so much for coming onto the show, Gaby.
Thanks so much. It's wonderful to be here.
Now, I know we touched on this in your intro, but Sister District is a force. You guys have done extremely important work in pushing back against Karl Rove and the far right that has had this deliberate decade-long strategy, at least, and capturing these state houses across our country. They came so close to holding enough state power across the United States that they could have called a constitutional convention to edit our constitution as Karl Rove saw fit. That's very scary. And groups like Sister District pushed us back from that edge, and you're continuing to chip away at their devastating Republican rat fucking, if you will. So just walk us through Sister District. What are you focused on, especially in these midterms, and why?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So as my bio may have indicated, I did not I fell backwards into politics, so to speak. And really after the 16 election, it's sort of a millennial meet cute. I met my co-founders on social media, and we came together really quickly after the 16 election with this goal, this mission of using volunteer power and activist power in a way that might really push the needle in a different way. And we came really, really quickly to understand that where we should be focusing our time is at the state level, and specifically at the state ledge level. I always say that Democrats are tardy to the party when it comes to paying attention to the importance of states. And certainly, as you alluded to, Republicans and conservative infrastructure in general has really focused very strategically on state ledge for many, many decades. So we knew we really wanted to focus on state ledge. I will definitely talk about reasons why, but I mean, as a bottom line, this is an overlooked venue of power for Democrats and progressives, and it's our policy pipeline, right? It's policies go from state to state and from state to federal. It's our leadership pipeline. Half of all members of Congress, half of all presidents started in their state legislature. And it's really where the rubber hits the road on an increasingly broad swath of policies that affect our daily lives, from abortion and free and fair elections to environmental policy and all the rest. So the idea was, and the name Sister District comes from the idea of a sister city. The idea was, what if we were able to sister up teams of volunteers somewhere to a few great state leg candidates somewhere else where we could have a big impact in terms of field support, knocking doors and making phone calls and writing postcards and texts, as well as fundraising, small grassroots fundraising. The idea took off. We have about 65,000 volunteers across the country now. I can't believe it's 6 years into this adventure that we're on. And each year we endorse a set of strategic, diverse, inspiring state-led candidates in important chambers. And then our teams get to work helping them win their elections. And it's been incredible to see the energy and enthusiasm grow around state-led, really kind of a dawning of understanding going on our side of the aisle about the importance of these states. So, in terms of your question about what we do this year and all the rest, I mean, what I would say is there's so much to talk about. But I think it's really important to take both a short-term and a long-term perspective about the work ahead in terms of building state power. In the short term this year, we need to work hard on these state-led races. The 2024 election happens this year. That's right. 2024 happens this year because whoever we elect to state legislatures this year is going to be in office during that critical post-2024 election period. And certainly January 6th and all the rest has shown us what they intend for that election, basically using their unearned gerrymandered state legislative majorities to engineer election outcomes in their favor. And so we counteract that now, this year, by getting involved in state-led races, and really a little goes a long way. But it's important to remember the long term as well. And that's something that I think we collectively have struggled with. Longer term, I think that structures follow ideas, and that we really need to invest a lot of energy and time as Democrats and progressives getting to understand the importance of state power better and getting comfortable and excited about building state power. There's really been kind of a long-term, I think, over-reliance on federal solutions and strategies and power building on the left to essentially the mutual exclusion of building state power as well. We should have been doing both all along, but we kind of didn't. And I think part of the reason why is because we don't have a deep ideological connection to the idea of state power, whereas on the right, it really is baked right into the fabric of their ideology. And we need to change the narrative. We need to build the narrative around the incredible, awesome power of states so that we're not just fighting against the terrible things that Republicans are doing in our states. Of course, we need to fight against that. But we also have to be for things as well, right? And we need to put that advice into action when it comes to building power, progressive power at the state level as well. So both short-term and long-term strategies are needed to counteract the exceptional imbalance in power between the right and the left when it comes to states.
Talk a little bit about North Carolina specifically. Why are we here at Gaslit Nation, our listeners, why are we joining forces with Sister District to make calls to voters in North Carolina this coming Tuesday, October 25th at 5 p.m. Eastern? Why North Carolina? What are the stakes in North Carolina specifically? I know I touched on it in the intro, but I'd love for you to just do a deeper dive on how important North Carolina is this election season.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm so excited that you are joining our phone bank. They're so much fun. Our organizing team just does a phenomenal job on these. And, the way it works is that everybody gathers by Zoom and, we do a kickoff and a little training and get to chat a bit at the top. And then everyone goes and makes some calls and we check in with each other every so often. And it's really fun. And we're so excited to have you. We've had some really fun times already this year. We've got Abby Jacobson, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, David Cross, all kinds of folks joining us for these phone banks. And what I always say is that, we don't have to just pivot all of our energy to focusing on state ledge races. Just do a little. A little goes a really long way at this level of the ballot. An hour of your time and, sort of a dollar goes a lot farther at this level than it does at other levels of the ballot. So, North Carolina is a really important state this year and every year. As you mentioned, North Carolina it's under divided government, which means that the governor is a Democrat and the Republicans control the state legislature. Historically, it has been terribly gerrymandered by Republicans who have used their gerrymandered majorities to further entrench themselves and further gerrymander. And actually, there's this sort of fringe legal theory that the right has been peddling for a while called the independent state legislature theory, which happy to talk about it. But my friend and colleague Dave Daly and I wrote an article about it last September, more than a year ago. And at the time, it was, greeted with this sort of crickets, like, why would you be writing about this? Sounds so crazy. This legal theory that would allow state legislatures to essentially overwrite election results that they don't agree with. How could that possibly be legal? How could that possibly pass muster? Well, lo and behold, and North Carolina plays into this, I'll mention, lo and behold, the Supreme Court is actually hearing a case that argues for this crazy theory that the state legislature has, sort of unfettered control. The federal constitution should be read in a way that gives state legislatures essentially unfettered control over federal elections. They're hearing a case this term. The oral argument was actually just set for December 7th in the Moore v. Harper case. And that case comes from North Carolina. And it comes from the Republicans in North Carolina legislature pushing this crazy theory that they should be able to decide federal election results, essentially. So, I mean, it's a little bit of an oversimplification of the Moore case. I encourage everybody to learn a little bit about this case. It could have very, very devastating effects on our democracy. But that's just a flavor of what the Republicans in the North Carolina legislature are pushing and what they think they should be able to do, essentially have this unfettered control. So it's very, very important that we continue to build power in North Carolina. We're not going to flip the North Carolina legislature this year. That's not the goal. That's not really in the cards this year. What we can do, what we have to do, is not lose any ground and continue to build a legislative bench of Democrats in this legislature to, as you mentioned, keep North Carolina a place where abortion is legal, keep North Carolina a place where Democrats have a path toward a progressive future. And the last thing I'll say about North Carolina, and I'm not sure who we'll be calling for during our joint phone bank, but we're going to be calling for, and we've endorsed a state senator named Sydney Batch, who is absolutely phenomenal. She's an incredible, would love to talk about Sydney all day. But the important thing to remember about the North Carolina State Senate is we're in danger of falling into a super minority. We're only 2 seats away from, if we lose 2 Democratic seats, including Sydney, it would give the Republicans a supermajority in that chamber, which would really allow them to accelerate and expand their regressive legislative agenda. So it's extremely important for us to take a stand in North Carolina to, put our foot down and support incredible progressive legislators and candidates there and fight back against this regressive agenda, and also fight for the North Carolina that we know we can have when Democrats control the legislature.
Could you talk a little bit about the horror show that the Republicans in North Carolina launched with this Supreme Court case? Because that's been on everyone's minds. That's the big, scary monster lurking over us at the moment. I know we're all focused on the midterms, which are essential, but just right around the corner, as you said, in December, the Supreme Court is going to start hearing this big democracy ending North Carolina case, which the Supreme Court could grant power to state governments to overturn the will of voters. And this includes federal elections, like the election of the president of the United States as well.
Yeah, so this is the independent state legislature theory that we were just talking about. And yes, it comes, as I mentioned, it comes to the Supreme Court courtesy of the Republicans in the North Carolina state legislature. And, the central legal theory, so to speak, underpinning this theory is an interpretation of the United States Constitution that argues that state legislatures have sole authority to set election rules, including assigning electoral college votes, immune from any judicial review by state courts. Now, I think it's really important for folks to understand that most legal scholars, believe that this is hogwash, right? This theory deserves condemnation, both as an anti-democratic effort to hand essentially absolute power to often wildly gerrymandered state legislatures, but also it deserves condemnation because it's a departure from decades of precedent, of constitutional precedent, right? The problem is that those scholars and those arguments, they don't have any of the 9 votes matter. Right. And certainly we have seen this court be willing to, slash through precedent and sort of legal history and frankly, American history and all the rest to advance their agenda. And, I think the other thing that's important to understand about this theory is that 4 conservative justices on the court have already indicated some level of support for this. Again, we're talking about potentially the end of our democracy, right? If these gerrymandered legislatures can just decide who wins the election, regardless of the votes, that's a checkmate, right? And 4 justices have already indicated some level of support for this theory. So, Gorsuch, Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh, and maybe Roberts. I mean, I don't know, but, he had a stinging dissent in a 2015 case out of Arizona about their independent redistricting commission that, puts them in a maybe column. But at least 4, Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh have indicated some level of support. So it would just take Roberts or Barrett to establish this crackpot theory as the law of the land, right? I think the other thing to understand about this theory is that there is a whole machine behind it. It's not just it didn't come out of nowhere, and it didn't come from the minds of the Republican state legislators in North Carolina that have sort of put this forward and gotten this in front of the Supreme Court. I think Jane Mayer has done an incredible job of documenting the sort of machinations and sort of the infrastructure on the right. Also, Nancy McLean's Democracy in Chains and Nelson's Shadow Network. All of these incredible journalists and writers have documented this long-term strategy in the conservative ecosystem to create essentially ideas that can take root in the academy, right, in universities and law schools and all the rest. And, this theory, right, derided, sort of bonkers legal interpretation of the U.S. Constitution is really part of that, right? There was a Harvard Law Review article earlier this year. There was a note in February that lent some intellectual credibility to this theory and all the rest. And so, it's taken a while for this to reach the Supreme Court and to have the sort of intellectual imprimatur of scholarship and, credibility that it would take to come before the Supreme Court. That's taken a lot of time and money on the right. So always important to remember that what we see in politics, in the law, in Supreme Court jurisprudence and all the rest never comes from, nowhere, right? It is hard fought for. And that's a good lesson for us as well as we fight so hard to build progressive power in our state.
That's all terrifying. What recourse do we have if this should pass and the Supreme Court says, yep, democracy over? what room do we have as a collective? What room do we have, period, in order to push back against this and protect the integrity of our elections?
Yeah, I mean, that is the $365 million question for all of us, right? And what I would say is that we'll know more about how the Supreme Court is thinking about this case pretty soon, right? Actually, today, the briefs are due. There are briefs due in the case today. The respondents are required to file their brief today. And so we'll start to get a better sense of what the nuances are here and what the likely outcomes might be. It's very possible that the Supreme Court, may not take a full-throated approach to endorsing this theory. It's just really, really hard to know right now. I mean, what it means is, regardless of the outcome of this case, we need to redouble our efforts in changing the composition of state legislatures, right? We need to really, really understand the power and the importance of these states. And, the other thing I'd say is, we talked about there's sort of a short term and a longer term approach. I mean, one thing I'd say about, we talked about the short term this year, 2024 happens now. And, a few things that I wanted to mention about that. I know everybody's sort of following the polls. Democrats had momentum over the summer. Maybe now it's flagging. What does it mean? And my bottom line on polls at this point of the cycle and all the rest is they're just crazy making, and they really don't matter. All that matters, all they're going to tell you is that things are close. And all that matters now is how many voters we talk to. All the polls are going to, basically at this point, they're within the margin of error. Or as Mike Podhorzer, who's kind of a godfather of progressive political strategy, likes to call it, margin of effort. I love that. Let's not think of it as a margin of error. Let's think of it as within the margin of effort, meaning if we work hard right now, we can overcome any deficit, or, if we don't work hard, we can lose any gain we might be showing in the polls right now. So it's all within the margin of effort. And that means that we can affect the outcome of these races this year. And one thing to remember there at the state ledge level is tiny, tiny margins separate Democrats from success and flipping chambers and holding on to chambers at the state ledge level. As an example, last year in Virginia, folks might remember that Democrats lost the House of Delegates in the legislature in Virginia. But what folks may not know is that we lost the entire chamber by 733 votes, right? Out of over 3 million votes cast, 733 votes separated us from holding that chamber in Virginia last year. And, similarly, we were talking about North Carolina. In 2020, there were 5.3 approximately million votes cast in 2020. And if we had gotten just 20,000 more votes in the most competitive district in the North Carolina House, 20,000 out of 5.3 million, we would have flipped that chamber, which of course, it would have had tremendous consequences. But the point being that that's a tiny, tiny margin, 0.04% of the total vote is all we would have needed in North Carolina in 2020 to have flipped that chamber. So these are tiny, tiny margins where a vote really does matter. Every vote matters. 2017, we worked with a candidate named Shelley Simons in Virginia, whose race was so close that it actually came down to a tie. And she and her opponent had to, so medieval. The way that Virginia settles a tie is by, an official truly, literally picking a name out of a bowl, ceramic bowl. And unfortunately, the name picked out of the bowl was not her name. was her opponent's name. She came back in 2019 and flipped that seat. But it shows how tight these margins are. So it shows that we shouldn't feel like legislative majorities and flipping seats in chambers is wildly out of reach for Democrats. It's not. Even in a state, where we're teetering on a super minority, right? In North Carolina, look how close we came in 2020 if we had just, gotten literally a tiny fraction of a percentage point. The other thing I would say, though, is it's really important for us to remember at the state ledge level that Democrats struggle with ballot roll-off. And we actually just put out a report about this, and we have a piece coming out really soon on this as well, looking at whether there's a partisan skew in roll-off. So as folks may or may not know, a lot of the time, voters, they'll vote for whoever's at the top of the ticket, president or their, senator, but they won't vote all the way down the ballot, down to the state ledge level. And that's called ballot roll-off. And what we found when we looked at 318 comparisons between higher up on the ballot and state ledge over a period of 10 years. And we found that Democrats running for state ledge in contested districts, places where both parties fielded a candidate, Democrats running for state ledge experienced ballot roll-off 80% of the time. 80% of the time. Our folks running for state ledge, received fewer votes than the top of the ticket in their district. There was significant roll-off. But the even wilder, so that alone is like, dude, we've got some problems. We got to work on that. The craziest part from our analysis is that on the Republican side, Republicans running for state ledge in those contested districts where both parties were running, they experienced roll-off only about 40% of the time. So 40 versus 80% of the time, that's a dramatic difference in the way that roll-off is experienced by the parties. So we have this chronic roll-off problem in a way that Republicans don't. And I want to be super clear, like, we can't out-organize and outvote gerrymandering and voter suppression, right? Those are structural barriers to voting that are very, that require structural solutions. We can't outvote that. But it's also not true to say that we can't vote any harder, because it's pretty clear that Democrats, a lot of us, can be voting harder by voting all the way down the ballot. So, that's another reason for us to really invest the time and the energy in building this narrative and this enthusiasm, this excitement about the importance of states to combat this roll-off problem that we have and close those tiny margins that we're often down when it comes to flipping a seat or an entire chamber at the state ledge level. So that's all to say that the work we're doing this year, it's not out of reach. Success is not out of reach for us. We just have to really focus and put our time and our energy where it can make a big difference.
Where has the central national coordinating Democratic Party been on all this? It seems that especially under Obama's 2 terms, they allowed Karl Rove to do a big nationwide takeover of state governments and were asleep on this all-important state level. And they also seem very slow to catch up, because the people we're interviewing about this extremely important issue that quite literally has led to Roe v. Wade being overturned and now threatens the very existence of our democracy with this North Carolina case, the Supreme Court's hearing. What the hell, Democratic leadership? Where have they been? Where's their responsibility in getting us to this point in terms of overlooking the states? And what are they finally doing now from what you're seeing to catch up, if anything?
This is such a great question. And we were talking about Dave Daley before. He wrote this wonderful book called Rat Fucked, which I encourage everyone to read, which is really a great piece of journalism about the 2010 Project Red Map Republican takeover of state legislatures all across the country. And just as you said, I mean, his book, detailed interviews with lots and lots of Democratic leaders, officials, in the party across the country and nationally who said they said it. They were asleep at the wheel. They were asleep at the wheel in 2010. That happened. So then comes 2020. What are we going to do? How can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? And as folks may know, we didn't clean up in 2020 at the state level either. One thing that is better in terms of the party structure, so there's an organization, it's called a sister committee in the parlance of our politics, called the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, the DLCC. And it's run by this incredible woman, Jessica Post, who tells the story of, being involved in the 2010 cycle and wanting to do, everything that she could going into, over the next decade to really make sure that it didn't happen again. And I think that the DLCC in particular has done a really excellent job of helping state parties and state infrastructure at the party level improve. This is a long-term game, though, and I'm not talking about the DNC. There's been some reports that the DNC has provided $0 to state to state infrastructure this year. I don't know the veracity of those claims. I've seen them published, but what I would say is that it's important to remember that the state parties are not the end of the story. And what I would argue is that state parties and the Democratic Party itself is just a part of this whole equation. And what we have on the left is a much larger problem than a party problem. I think I mentioned before, I think structures, right, institutions and all of that, they follow ideas. And we have an anemic long-term institution building problem on the left when it comes to state and local power. And it's not just the party, right? It's the way that large institutions over-focus on federal litigation, federal legislation, advocacy, all the rest. There's been this long-term overinvestment at the federal level. And I think, again, in turn, why is that the case? I think that Democrats and progressives we don't have a good foundation for the idea of state power. And conservatives do, right? And that goes back to Jane Mayer's work and all the rest, really documenting the strong institutions, the structures that the right has built over 100 years. And it really comes down to them having a baked in belief in and understanding in the value of state power, right? And we can go back to, really the founding of the Civil War, right? The sort of conservative state recalcitrance to Reconstruction, all states' rights, right? These ideas are rooted into the fabric of conservative ideology in a way that we don't have, right? We don't have this deep connection to the power of states as something that is really important for us to build. And so we need to combat that by shifting the narrative and shifting our focus collectively, including the party, of course, but it's not just the party. It's about donors. It's about institutions. It's about how everyday people, progressives, think about the importance of different levels of government. We have to shift all of that on a long, in the long term to be able to sustain the kind of movement that we need in building permanent progressive power in our state.
What advice do you have for someone who lives in a state with extreme Republican gerrymandering, like Ohio, where elections are predetermined, or in a state, same thing, Missouri, where state referendums, the will of the voters, are ignored by the Republicans in power, who are there, again, because of extreme gerrymandering? We call these states voter hostage states, electoral autocracy states. What advice do you have for people in those states that are stuck there? They can't relocate. Why should they have to relocate? That's their state, that's their home. What can they do to chip away at essentially a legalized autocracy that Republicans have engineered?
Yeah. I mean, get involved in state and local politics. Our friends that run for something can help you run for office. If you're a young person and you want to run, step up and run. These are small races and, not to say that they're not hard and expensive and all the rest, but they're doable. And there are resources for folks who might want to run for office. Besides running for office, volunteer a little bit with local candidates, state ledge candidates. One of the things that our volunteers love about working with state ledge candidates is that they're so approachable. And unlike a congressional candidate or Senate candidate or gubernatorial candidate, these folks will join your phone bank. They'll hop on a Zoom and tell you about why they're running, why they're inspired to provide this service to their communities. These are much more bite-sized races where individual people can really have an impact on the course of the race and the outcome. And like I said, these races themselves many of them end up by tiny margins. And so, even if you're in a red state, there may not be, an unlimited number of them, but there are competitive races in your state for state ledge, and they'll be decided by a handful of votes, even in Ohio and Missouri and all the rest. We worked with candidates in 2019 in Louisiana and Mississippi, and doesn't get much redder than Mississippi in terms of the legislature. Of course, there's lots of great progressives in that state, and they're working hard to build power there. But certainly, the legislature is very, very red. And we helped a candidate in Jackson, near Jackson, helped her flip her seat. She beat a guy who had been in office since she was 7 years old, a Republican who had been in office since she was 7, and she won by less than 100 votes in Mississippi. So, there are always going to be tight races. And I should say, in Mississippi and Louisiana, we had candidates who lost by less than 100 votes. And so there are tiny, tiny margins, even in states that are badly gerrymandered. Like I said, there's not, an unlimited number of those seats. And certainly one of the outcomes of this round of gerrymandering in many states has been an increasingly small number of competitive seats. But there are still competitive seats, and it's incredibly important and rewarding to fight for them and really feel invested and connected to your own state legislature. The other thing I'd say is once the session rolls around, follow the bad guys too and hold them accountable. Accountability at the state ledge level is really, really important and really needed because legislators they're accountable to their constituents, especially the loud ones. Right. And so, make your feelings known. And again, it's not like shouting into the void of trying to get on the radar of a national candidate or legislator or something. This is someone, your Republican state legislator may only have 2,000 constituents or 5,000 constituents. Getting involved in accountability work and following your local state house reporters, even just on Twitter, amplifying the messages of great progressive legislators in your state, even in Ohio and Missouri, everywhere. There are incredible progressive state legislators doing awesome work, but their voices are very small, right? Drowned out in the sea of red, anger and vitriol, but they could use your support in helping amplify the work that they're doing and building their voice up. So there are always ways to get involved, and there are incredible activists and legislators in every state, the reddest states, the bluest states, everything in between, and they can really use the support. It's a really, really, again, bite-sized way for everyone to get involved locally for states that they are in themselves.
Thank you so very much, Gaby Goldstein of Sister District. Now, here's Neil Morgan, the head of organizing for Sister District, providing a crash course on phone banking, making calls to voters to get out the vote. Neil and I hope to see you all at the Sister District Gaslit Nation phone banking party this coming Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. That's October 25, Tuesday, 5 p.m. Eastern. Sign up at the Gaslit Nation website at gaslitnationpod.com. Click on the 2022 Survival Guide on our homepage and sign up for this Tuesday's North Carolina phone banking party with Sister District, and check out our other big Get Out the Vote events on that same page, because protecting democracy depends on us.
Hey everybody, it's Neil. I'm head of organizing with Sister District. So if you want to help elect Democrats in must-win state legislative races, you gotta volunteer. You gotta sign up for every last Sister District national phone bank you can. I want to give you 2 reasons why, but first I want to talk about what it's like to be on a Sister District phone bank. You join by Zoom. Phone bank lasts 2 hours. We're on the Zoom call together. It feels very communal. We ask questions and share successes in the chat. There's a full training at the top, so no experience is necessary. And we do frequent check-ins throughout. Each phone bank is run by a Sister District staffer. I want you to know that every voter we're calling, the campaigns have it on good information. They're in the ballpark of voting with us. So you're not being sent to argue with people. That's not what this is about at all. Here are the 2 reasons why I want to encourage you to do this. Number 1, phone banking works. On average, at each Sister District national phone bank, we identify 14 undecided voters and recruit 4 local volunteers for our campaigns. And we make 17 vote plans with our supporters. The second reason I want to encourage you to phone bank with us, you might be feeling uneasy, a little anxious right now about what's going to happen in the midterms. Phone banking gives you the opportunity to have a concrete impact in real time. There's no question but that when you find an undecided voter, you're helping the campaign. There's no question but that when you help a supporter make a plan to vote, you're helping the campaign win. Please volunteer with Sister District. Sign up for every last national phone bank you can. And hey, show up to the 5 p.m. Eastern shift on October 25th. Call with Andrea Chalupa. That's my phone bank. You'll be on with me. It'll be fun. Okay, thanks everybody.